Hi everybody. Today we are going to be making a really cool picture that is going to look like we're laying on the ground in a forest with a bunch of trees coming up above us. And we're going to be using some really pretty autumn colors as we add color to this. So first of all, what we are going to be doing is a little bit of perspective. Now, 1 point perspective is where you just draw a point. But for our purposes, we want to draw kind of like a circle somewhere on our paper. And I know I'm holding mine horizontally right now, but if you would like to hold your paper vertically so it is a bit taller, that is absolutely fine. Either way is totally fine for what you want to do. You may put your circle wherever you want. I don't totally recommend right in the middle, but if that's really where you want it, fine. What I am going to do is lightly, because we are going to be erasing this circle after, I am going to draw kind of a medium-sized circle on my paper. From this circle, this is where our trees are going to end. So we'll end up kind of like with a hole in the middle where we can see the sky. So how I'm going to do that is from the edge of my paper, starting right at the edge, I am going to make lines that come in almost to that circle, but not quite, just with my pencil. Then I am going to decide how wide I want my trees to be. And I'm going to say, for me, just a little bit wider than a finger's width. So here's the width of my finger. There's a little bit of space here, a little bit of space here. And you will also notice that I am not making those lines perfectly straight. Okay, so there is going to be the trunk of one tree. We are going to be adding branches as well in a little bit. So I'm going to work my way around my paper, just continuing to make some trees. Make sure you leave at least a little bit of space in between them, because otherwise the branches are going to get really close together. And maybe some are taller than others, so maybe this one doesn't quite come as far out to the circle. And again, I'm trying to make them all just a little bit wider than a finger's width. And these are just the trunks of the trees. So this is showing us how tall these trees are, coming from the ground, going off into the distance, up in towards the sky. Okay, at this point I have added all of my tree trunks, and you will notice it almost starts looking like a bit of a sun design right now, which is totally fine, and that's actually perfect. So this right here is going to end up being erased in a little bit. These are the trunks of our trees. Next, what we are going to do is we're going to start adding some branches on these trees, and there's a couple of different ways, but one of the ways that I have seen it done, and I feel is one of the easiest ways, is you want to make sure that your trees closer to, your branches closer to the bottom or the edges of your paper are larger. The ones closer to the circle are going to be smaller, because we're trying to show that those are farther away. So to do one tree and the branches, what I might choose to do is have kind of these triangles, long skinny triangles. They are not huge. And then you just kind of add some V's and Y's. Okay, so again, and they wouldn't come out quite as far. The farther up they go, the farther away from the edge of your paper, they do not come out as far. And again, they get thinner as they move away. So if you look right down here, they get thinner as they move away from the trunk. then you can go in and add even smaller triangles, and then you kind of just add these V's to make it look a little bit more realistic. So at this point, I have most of my branches done. I have noticed that I kind of like how they look when they're a little bit more slanted up compared to coming out more. So I may leave these just to see how they will look. I am also going to go up and add just a little bit more towards the top, but without going super crazy with it, because otherwise it's going to be very busy. But again, you kind of come out, then you add a Y, and then you can add some V's to make it look like the smaller twigs coming off. And I think that this looks pretty good. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to really work to erase this circle because we don't need it anymore. And then we are going to start adding lines and some bark texture to our trees. To create the bark texture for our trees, we are going to be using oil pastels. Oil pastels are almost like a soft crayon. However, these are oil based while crayons are wax based. So I have a brown, then I also have a peach. So not the pink color. And we are going to start with the brown. And what we are going to do is we're going to trace around the outside of all of our trees. Do not rub your hand across your oil pastels because then it will cause it to smear everywhere. So you do want to be really careful with this. These are going to create a much thicker line than what we have, so do not panic if it ends up looking a little bit different than those really skinny pencil lines. It is absolutely fine. So we're not coloring in right now, we're just really getting the outline traced, and then we're going to add the texture onto the inside. So as I am working, I am noticing that some of my lines are really, really small. So I'm just kind of picking and choosing which ones I'm really tracing, because tracing every single little line is not necessarily going to work best with this thicker material. I am also making sure that I am pressing firmly, so I'm getting a nice dark line and outline, because otherwise when I go to add some paint to this for my sky, the paint could just cover over all of the oil pastel if you have drawn like gently and lightly. Now that I have finished tracing all of my trees, what I am going to do, still with the brown oil pastel, is I am going to add some extra lines inside of my trees. I am not going to worry about filling every single space in, because when we go in with the peach, we will work on getting them nice and solid so it looks more like a solid tree. But I am just going to follow the length of my tree all the way to the edge of your paper. If you are worried about getting oil pastel on the table, you are more than welcome to grab a messy mat or an extra piece of scrap paper to put under the edge so that you just don't get it onto the table. But we can always wipe down the tables after without it being a huge deal. So I'm just adding some lines going with the lines of my tree, because bark, the lines tend to go in the direction that the tree is growing. Again, all the way to the very edge of your paper. Now that I have some very stripy trees, I'm going to go in with the peach color. What this is going to do is it is going to blend with the brown, and it's just going to give us some highlights in the bark. I am going to try to make sure that I get those white spaces filled in a bit more. But if I don't get all of them, that is absolutely okay. Do not really panic over it. And we're just gonna, again, make those nice long lines. You can go out into the branches a little bit, but that's just going to give us a bit more texture and make it look more like a tree instead of a solid brown shape. Once you have added all of the peach, you can go back in. So for example, on this tree right here, I'm noticing it's really peachy right in there. So I'm just going to go back in and add a little bit more brown to kind of tone that down. If you like how it looks with those lighter spots, you are absolutely welcome to just leave it, because this is your work. And if you notice any spots where you are feeling like there really should be a branch and you may have just left it off, or you're just looking at it with fresh eyes, you can always go in and just add a branch to help it look like the space is a little bit more full. At this point, I'm quite happy with my trees and how they are looking and the texture of the bark. So what I am going to do now is I'm going to put away my oil pastels because I'm done with these two colors, and I am going to get set up for paint because we're going to do a painted sky for our trees. Just to review some of our painting expectations, these are our tempera cakes. They work similar to watercolors, but they are not actually watercolors. And you will notice that my blue is right here, and it looks like there's none in it, but there is plenty around the edge. So instead of just swirling around the bottom, like I would potentially for the brown, going around here, I need to make sure that I'm going up more on this side, but again, carefully so I'm not damaging my paintbrush. Right now, these are all dry, but if you are coming in after a class that has already painted, be aware these may be wet. So what I'm going to do is I just have a little cup of water. You have bigger water trays, and I just add a little bit. So I swirl around my water. Sometimes I will tell students to do the sweep across the bottom. That's helpful when you're switching colors. However, today we are doing a wash, which is where we are doing one color for the whole space. If you really want to add in a little bit of purple, you could, but I am going to ask that we mainly stick with our blue and maybe a tiny bit of that violet. I'm not recommending black because if we use black, it would be nighttime, and then we wouldn't really see the colors of the leaves that we are going to add later. So you will notice that I'm going around the edge, and I am having to move my hand, but when I lift up, my paintbrush still looks good. I'm not mashing it. It's still having what I call a good hair day. We want this sky to be light. We don't want it super deep and intense, but that may be a little tricky from the first get-go. So what I tend to do is I will start right in the middle, and that's really pretty dark. But then what I can do is I can just dip in the water and kind of spread that out. And I am going right over the trees. I'm not trying to go around them. That is going to take me forever to try to go around them. But I'm just kind of spreading that paint out toward the very edge. And again, if you don't want to get it on the table, if you're worried about that, or if you're in a different classroom where that's an expectation, by all means, get a messy mat. But I can literally just keep spreading this and do quite a bit. Then I add more blue. Okay, and I would pick up more water again right over those trees, because then if there's any white space, it will fill them in. I am getting some oil pastel that is like kind of those spots. Don't worry about it, it's fine. Again, if your paint is not working super well, do a dip in the water, pick up more paint, and then spread it out. And I'm making sure it is pretty watery, so I'm not trying to make it super dark. We just want a nice light daytime sky. And once you kind of have a puddle in the bottom of your blue, like mine now has kind of a puddle, I'm more pulling from that instead of going up on the sides because I want it to be lighter. I don't want a lot of that pigment in there. So the pigment is the color. again, you want to make sure that you are painting right to the very edge of your paper because we are using the whole space. Once your space is all filled, and maybe you are thinking that you want to add a little bit of the violet to it, I am going to do that just so that you will see what will happen. Although I will be really honest with you, I like how it looks just with the blue. You do want to give it a few minutes to dry before we start adding in the leaves. So what I am going to say is that at this point, what you should do, leave it right at your table, depending on how much time you have left in class, and clean up your painting supplies. But I'm just going to show you really quickly if you want to add a little bit of that kind of magenta-ish purple color that we have. And again, you don't want to make it super dark, but you can kind of add it maybe more in the center, or you could kind of do it the other way and have it more towards the outside. But you don't necessarily want it looking super dark and obvious, but if you want to add just little touches of it, you are welcome to. Okay, so you can kind of see how that's just adding almost like a pink tint to my work. What I am doing is I'm grabbing some of that color, I'm actually dipping into the water to help water it down before I put it on my paper, because I don't want it super vivid like right here. That's going to look weird when it dries. So I'm actually going to rinse my paintbrush off a little bit and spread that out so it's not quite as intense. And just be aware, if you have big puddles of water on your paper, it is going to take it longer to dry, so you may want to work to kind of spread those out a little bit more. But if you are also pressing really hard on your paper and it's super watery, water weakens your paper, so you may actually end up wearing a hole in it. So be just aware of your paper and if it is going to tolerate that or not. So now you'll see I have kind of this purplish effect in here and then just the light blue down here. I am going to rinse, I'm going to go to the sink, clean out my paintbrush. Even though I've rinsed it out in here, I still want to do a good job cleaning it, and I'm going to put away my painting supplies before I start on my leaves. After we have given our paper some time to dry, we are going to move on and start adding the leaves to our work. I have chosen some fabulous fall colors. So I have red, orange, yellow, also some green if I want to. That is totally fine. This is the regular green, not that yellow green color. So what we are going to do next, and we are going to go in a certain order, and I will explain why when we get there, but the first color we are going to use is our red. Then we are going to use our orange, and then we are going to use our yellow. Green can be a choice. You would potentially use it in between the red and the orange, or first. That is kind of up to you. So I am going to get started. Watch carefully, because I'm not simply banging my oil pastel onto my paper. What I am doing is I'm taking my oil pastel and I'm almost giving it a little bit of a twist to make a mark. And I am making small marks, not like this one. Looks like a line. It does not look like a leaf, friends. So you'll see that that one looks kind of awkward compared to the other ones. So I am going to keep going in. I should not really hear the oil pastel on your paper. It shouldn't sound like a million things tapping. In some places, I am going right over where the oil pastel on the trees are, because there would be leaves in front of that. You are probably going to spend a long time making leaves. So we want them to be nice and full, not only around the branches, in between as well, because these would cover over some of those branches. So there might be smaller ones farther away in the distance, and we wouldn't necessarily see them. So, and again, just keep working your way around. Notice where some empty spaces are, but also remember that we are going to be using other colors. We can go back in and add more colors and like do the green again as we keep working. But for right now, I just want you to stick with one color. Get yourself so that you're pretty pleased with how that color looks. Make sure that you have some by all of your trees, and then this is looking pretty good to me. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch to my red, and I'm going to keep going. I will check back in before I use my yellow, so you are going to keep watching while I do this. Then you will hear me talk about the yellow. After I do the yellow, I'm going to tell you to get started on yours, on your assignment. But I do want you watching this so that you understand the whole process before you get started. As I continue working on my leaves, something that I want you to notice is that down in here, I am being a little bit more careful to keep it closer to the branches because these would be closer to us. Up in here, I'm kind of doing them almost all over the place, and that's appropriate because those are supposed to look like they're farther away. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start adding in some of that yellow. The yellow is going to be a little bit lighter, and it also might work to blend some of these colors together. So I'm not coloring, I'm still doing that little twist like I've been showing you, so that I get a decent mark without making like a big line. If I just bang this on my paper, I don't get a good mark, like you can't really see anything, compared to if I do a little bit of a press on it or a little bit of a twist, and in some spots it is going to be a little bit harder to see, but it does work better. I will say this is something that is going to make your hand a little bit sore maybe. So if you need to take a break, it is totally fine to take a break for a couple of minutes, but it is not totally fine to distract other people at your table or in the class, because everybody is trying to do their best job and focus. So you'll see that that yellow kind of acts really nicely, and I'll move this closer to the camera so that you can see, but the yellow really does look nice. And then if I decide, oh, you know, I'd like to add in some more red, or I'd like to, maybe I want there to be a little bit more green, that's okay. It's my choice as the artist, but I just want you to notice that I'm not putting leaves down where there really aren't branches, because there really wouldn't be leaves there. They wouldn't be randomly absolutely everywhere. I am trying to think about, hey, when I look at a tree, where are the leaves? They're up towards the branches. They do not go down the trunk. That's not how it works. So I'm sticking closer to the branches. Up in here, I can kind of put them where I want because there would be smaller twigs and stuff. And I'm just working to fill the space, make it look interesting, make sure I have nice colors to show a beautiful fall afternoon. And so I am going to keep going a little bit more until I'm happy with it, and then I will check back in to talk about finishing it up. Alrighty, when you feel that you have filled your space, you are happy with how it looks, so the very last thing you are going to do is you are going to show it to me if you are in my class. We are going to have a quick conversation about it, and then if we both agree that your work is completely finished, what I am going to ask you to do is to sign it. So I'm going to use just a regular pencil, and in the bottom corner, and if you have a tree right here, that is absolutely fine. Just go right through it, right over it. But we are really working on, as artists, to remember to sign our work when we're done. And so I am gonna sign mine, and I normally, as an artist, I use my first name instead of Ms. So I am going to do it in cursive because that's how I do it. You do not have to. Okay, so I sign it in the bottom corner. You will also add in your class. So I hope you enjoyed following along, and I will see you all next time. Bye, everybody.